Well, it's 4:30, so we're going to start. I want to welcome you to this fun event to talk about Mrs. Allison's new book here at Southern Seminary's Bookstore. It has been a week, guys. So we had World Watch starting last Thursday, then Seminary Preview, Voice Preview tomorrow, and that has flanked our trustees, donors, and Getty concert. Like, everything is going on. We got SWI tonight in a couple of hours, but it's a joy to welcome you and to have this time to talk a bit. Some of you may have been here 3 weeks ago when we talked about the Walker's new book. So Mrs. Christian Walker is a co-author on that. And so now suddenly we've got 3 faculty wives, the 2 joining me as authors, which is very fun. So several weeks ago for our Seminary Women's Auxiliary, we had a meeting where the 3 of us did mini seminars talking about our books, and that was also very fun. We did a little book signing at the end, and Christian took a picture and put up this kind of catty caption, which didn't get posted anywhere, but like, we write books too. Ours aren't as long, and they may be more interesting. So I don't know about that. But if you go to the seminary's web page for the Women's Auxiliary, there's the recordings for those, and the handouts are out there too. This is also a good opportunity for me to say what I don't get to say often, and we are so fully aware of the world-class faculty that the Lord has provided here for both Southern and Boyce College. But those men married some amazing women, and so I get to serve with faculty wives who are very much gifted in their own right. And probably the majority of them would sooner have a root canal than to be up here right now talking with us or talking about writing books. But their giftedness is more behind the scenes, and we greatly value that. There is lots of mentoring going on that we don't even know about, but we do see the fruit of that in our faculty wives investing in the female students and the student wives who are here. But there are some of us who do enjoy teaching, and the Lord has gifted us in that way, and that's the only way Seminary Wives Institute has worked. Now we're in our 28th year of the program, and so it's a tremendous blessing for our student wives to study with seminary faculty members. I won't start listing them because I'll leave out too many, but it's amazing that those men give their time in addition to their teaching load to come and teach our wives. But it wouldn't work without women teaching women. And so we have women who come and who teach, and we don't draw straws to see who teaches what. We each teach what we're passionate about teaching. And so that has just worked beautifully as we teach on campus, which is our preference, and also now online. And so Mrs. Allison has taught for years now leadership skills for women, both on campus and online. And so it is great to welcome you. I also want to add that at the end of this very busy week, has been noted on campus a couple of times after preview on Friday, I'm having a little party on Saturday for my husband's birthday. And it's also Mrs. Allison's birthday on that same day. They share a birthday. So I'm sure Dr. Allison, who's graced us with his presence back there, has something planned for Saturday. It's going to be great. So that's awesome. That's great. So we're so glad that you're here to talk about your book. Just a little bit more background about you before we jump in. You guys met at Northern Illinois University?
We did. We were both
right?
students there the same year.
That's awesome. And been married how long?
48 years.
48.
Woo.
So 3 grown children, 12 grandchildren, 1 who's just arrived. So the most important question is, first off, tell us about that new grandson.
Yes. 2 weeks ago, we welcomed Witten Samuel into the world. He is our 12th grandchild, but he is our 9th grandson. So when they were first found out they were pregnant, I said, we need another girl. We have 3 girls and 8 boys. And my husband said, no, we need a baseball team. So that's what we got. We got a baseball team.
And he's going to be a Cubs fan like you guys.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Yes, without a doubt.
So the title of your book, of course, is A Short Guide to Women's Ministry. Came out in May from Broadman and Holman.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how this came about, how you were asked to do it, why you did it, and kind of who your audience is.
Yeah. So over the years, I was a women's ministry director in 2 different churches. And over the years, you don't even realize what you're learning until other people ask you questions. You think, well, I've done that. Well, I could maybe help, or I could explain that. And so as the time wound down, I stepped down from my job as women's ministry director here at a church to help with another church. And I had less responsibilities, but I still kept getting asked these questions. And I thought, well, now is the time maybe to put these into writing. And besides all that, my husband pushed me into it. He made me do it. He would keep saying, you really should write this down. You really should write a book. And I said, well, I don't think, there's so many books out there. There's so many people that have written on this subject or other topics. And he would be quiet for a while. If you know him, very mild-mannered, very polite. You really should write a book. Have you thought any more about writing the book? Maybe you should pray about it. Have you written this? And so just to make him be quiet, I said, okay, I'll do it.
Because you're such a submissive wife,
That's
too,
exactly,
right? Yes.
That is exactly it. The tricky part was, as a first-time author, I needed to write a proposal. And so you write a couple sample chapters, and you have to submit it and who your audience is and how is this different from other books. And I felt a little vulnerable doing that because you just send it to a publisher and you don't know what they're going to say. And so I sent it to 2 different publishers that my husband recommended. And the first response I got was a pretty quick response. And the publisher said, I gave this to my team and they didn't love it. Period, the end.
Cold, very cold.
And
That's
I
a rejection letter.
Oh, ouch. Like, I could teach you how to write a more maybe soothing or compassionate rejection letter. But then a few weeks later, I heard from another publisher, and it was much more positive. So that was,
and it was
that was
Broadman and Holman,
Lifeway.
which is our
Yes.
Southern Baptist printing company.
Exactly.
Yes, great.
Yeah.
So my experience was very different from that. I spoke at the Gospel Coalition. A publisher was there, came up to me to ask what student wives might be interested in reading. I thought that was why we were meeting. And then she pulls out this piece of paper with all this writing on it. And she's like, I came to your session today. And I was like, oh, great. And she says, I think there's a book here. And I said, like a 20-page book. I spoke for 45 minutes. What? And so mine was very different in that they're asking me to do it. And then I'm sending... Like, I get a chapter ready. I send it across the pond because it's a British publisher.
Yes.
And I've gone over it multiple times thinking,
Right.
okay, I've changed this, if this is how I want it. And then it comes back, and guess what? It's got some things they would want to change with that software that you find out as an author, like you sign off on this or you don't sign off on this. And so it is a humbling process.
Definitely.
It definitely is.
Definitely, yes.
And I think some of these writers that we all read, I'm thinking they don't do that. Like, I won't start naming some, but like I think if they send a chapter, they're like, all right, got it, chapter 2.
Right.
And part of it for me was the colloquialisms of British versus American
Yes,
English. So they didn't know what I was talking about in some words.
Right.
But others of it was like, we want this to be like you're sitting down with one of your student wives and you're just speaking to them, which is great. But my student wives are smart women. They're not like third graders, right? So there's words I'm using that I don't want to dumb it down.
Right.
So it came to the point of like, a little give and take. All right, I'll give you that, but I really like who's writing this book is what I'm saying at my computer. Like, is this your book or my book?
That's right.
So it is a learning
is.
experience. But and then you had a friend that was here this week that I know, Terry, that just really, and you gave her credit in the book. But
I did. She was a great encouragement too, and she had me send her every chapter as I would write them, and then she would read them. The downside was she is such an encouraging, sweet friend that she would just tell me everything was perfect and wonderful.
No.
And I said, well, what would you recommend? Oh, don't change a thing. It is just perfect. It just keeps getting better. So I kept thinking, okay. Now my publisher didn't exactly agree. It was very sweet and it helped me through the process, but it wasn't a big, help in terms of fine-tuning the book.
She was an encourager, not an editor then.
That's right, exactly.
That's great.
Exactly.
And then with so many chapters like you have, I mean, for me, there was a point with some of this to be like, especially with the second book on Susanna Spurgeon, where they were more generous with the word count, but I'm thinking, I don't know that I can write 12,000 words on whatever. So you're looking at this blank screen, and then the more you get into it and you find there's more to say, then it's like you're bumping up against
those word
count.
counts.
So all that was helpful too.
Yes.
So the audience is obviously women.
Yes, and I think the women that I had in mind primarily were women that don't have access to someone to kind of disciple them through what it means to lead other women or help them grow. I think about women in small churches all around as I was was writing this, and I thought, what kind of questions have I gotten from women who don't know, anything about starting this? Or I'd have some of my husband's students, and then their wives would come and they say, we're just getting started in a new church. We're just, I want to get something going for women, but I've never done this before. Can you give me some advice? And it's like, where do I start?
Right.
And so I was thinking of them as I was writing the book.
So it's written from a basic level to like
Very
starting.
basic.
This is not for women who've done this a lot before.
Although I did have people tell me there are things in there that they would find very helpful if they had done it. And I also tried to keep in mind that this wasn't just for somebody who's starting a women's ministry in a church, but that if you want to start a Bible study or if you want to mentor women, there are helpful things that can help women grow in whatever situation or context they find themselves in.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about the book's structure and layout. You've got a good table of contents with lots of chapters.
Yes. Yeah, there are 10 chapters. After each chapter, I put questions so that you could kind of, hone in on some of the main points of the chapter that way. Also in the back, I included an appendix because as I was writing the book, in fact, my original proposed title was Principles and Practices of Helping Women Grow, because I wanted it to be based in biblical principles, be really solid that way, but I also wanted to have some practical things that people could adopt, either hook, line, and sinker. You could take it and do it in your church, or it would just spur people on in their creativity to maybe do something a little differently, but that would help them do that. So that's what's in the appendix, some specific things that people could use in their churches. And again, since it was kind of a principles and practices kind of a book, I will have our second chapter is looking at a principle, and then the following chapter is, well, how would you do this? What are some ways that you could accomplish that? So I tried to keep that balance in the book.
So you've got that question, like, where do I start? Which is somewhat you're addressing to help women grow in the faith. So you've answered that. What about the starting places that you discuss? Kind of we're going to the there and we're here now. How do we get to the there? How are we getting point A to point B?
Yeah. One of the questions I would often get is, where do I start? I want to work with women. I want to help them grow. Where do I start? And as I thought that through, there are really two good answers to that question. You have to know where you're going. So the there, right? The starting with the end in mind. You have to know the goal, and everything you do, whatever kind of event or program or whatever, should help you reach that goal. So you always need to keep the there in mind. But the other answer to the question is you need to start where you are. You need to kind of take inventory of what you have, the people that you have, the resources that you have, the gifting that God has given the women around you. And so it's kind of like a GPS, right? You can know where you're going, but if you don't know where you are, it's going to be tricky to get there, right? So you need to know where to start, and you start where you are, and then you need to know how to get where you're going. And as I talked about in the book, different people might word it differently, but I had three main goals, if you will, that kept jumping out at me from the word and what we're aiming for when we're discipling women. And one is that we would all know God and know him well, know the God of the Word, not just a God from our imagination. So help women in any way that we can through the study of the Word, looking at doctrines, looking at all kinds of things so that we would know our true God. And then the second one is to help women become like God. So the process of sanctification, right? Helping women learn how to be more like him, walking in the Spirit and becoming like him. And then the third is like how to spread his fame. So making God famous, as John Piper would say, right? And so the idea is everything we do, whatever programs we design, whatever events we do, they should have one or all of these goals in mind, that we're helping women know God and become like him and spread his fame. And it's easy, I think, in women's ministry to get lost in a lot of different things that we might be doing. And so if we keep these goals in mind, it kind of helps us keep on track.
So I think you said your favorite chapter in the book is how to cultivate happy hearts.
Yeah.
You talked about the stars and the hearts. Explain that
Yeah,
a little
yeah. Yeah, I talked about happy hearts. I talked about healthy hearts of women. I think it's really important that we help women know how to rest in the Lord, know how to spend time with the Lord, know their identity in Christ. And then I think it's really important that, and God tells us this over and over and over throughout the scriptures, how to remember. Remember who God is, remember who he created us to be, remember what he created us for. And so I think it's important as we're working with women that we focus on the women, not the events or the program. I read a book once that kind of changed my whole focus early on as I was looking to lead women's ministry. And it talks about that we're not here to build strong ministries. We're here to build strong women who minister. And so if our focus is really on those women, then we need to focus on how to keep them healthy spiritually so that they can then, in turn, build into other women.
I think I was thinking of the adage about having happy hearts that we tell children and grandchildren. It is healthy hearts is the name of it.
Yeah.
And that's good. And you give a lot of practical ways for women to rest as well.
Yeah,
That's in that chapter.
I had to learn those personally.
Yeah.
It gets busy. Life gets busy, doesn't it? We have to learn how to rest.
We do. Now, we've been doing this a while, decades.
That's right.
Leading women. And so the whole topic of women's ministry really has changed over the years.
Has. Mm-hmm.
It used to somewhat, at least in the SBC, be in competition a bit in the early days with WMU or any type of missions organization.
Yes.
So you would have the WMU over here. You're going to be in that group, or you're going to be in the cool new women's ministry group. And clearly the older ladies were doing the WMU and the younger ladies were doing women's ministry. And then WMU just decided to own that. And I remember ads that they started running in like SBC Life, where they'd have like what was really a little old lady's purse. Oh. And then it would have a picture of like some animal print younger purse in those days. And it's like, we've got a whole new bag. Like they were trying to bridge
clever
whatever there. But and then there was this season where you basically just pushed play on a video, which I hated that season, where it was just very lazy leadership, where there are these giants that everybody wants to hear teach. So we push play, and then we kind of talk about what was discussed.
Okay.
Or we do the retreat in a box, which is kind of the same idea. Like, don't work too hard, but just open the box and pull the stuff out, and you don't have to pay for a speaker or anything. Just have them come. There used to be like staff members fairly commonly in a lot of our churches that were designated. We didn't call them pastors. We called them women's ministry leaders. Mm-hmm. And I've wondered what your thoughts are on this. Like, that's gotten pushed out a bit, and I'm wondering if it's related to the fact that, in the not-so-distant past, we had Sunday school classes. Most churches had Sunday school classes, and so that's when you met in small groups. Mm-hmm. So you then had maybe church on Wednesday. You avoided Fridays for the weekend, but you had like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday nights that you could have in play to have your women's group. Well, now you got small groups meeting all of those nights of the week. Mm-hmm. And so you can't really have those in competition with each other because you want the people in the small groups. Do you think that has impacted somewhat how women's ministry is now just kind of morphed a bit?
I don't know. I had the blessing. At the time, it felt like a lacking in my life. But I had the blessing of coming in kind of late and not having a lot of experience in traditional churches. I became a believer through Cru in college, and then my husband and I were on staff. We were overseas, and so when I came back and I was asked to lead the women's ministry, I didn't have a lot of experience, so I didn't know what I was changing.
Probably a good thing.
Yeah, it was really a blessing. And so it was like, well, we want to help women grow, so this is maybe how we should do this. And we need to disciple women because that's what Jesus did. So that's what we're going to do. So I didn't go through any of those phases. I didn't know any better. But it was really impactful, I think. We did have, I was in a traditional church the first time in Portland, Oregon, and there were these different groups, but I just kind of tried to attend all the things and encourage the women that were in those, but also meet with them and talk about what our goals are. And some of the missionary society women would be, they would talk about, well, people aren't coming, the young people aren't coming. So we would sit down and talk about why not. They would have a prayer time and they'd ask random people to pray, and we didn't even know the missionaries. So I said, well, I think that might make people a little uncomfortable. So how could we do this differently so that we can incorporate people who have never come before? So I think there's a way to get around all that, but again, it's all about meeting with the people and getting to know the women and know kind of what they're about, and then helping the women know what your goals are and what your plans are. And I think, I don't know about like the evening, morning things and the meeting times, but it worked out for us at our church because we started a women's Bible study that grew and became kind of the heartbeat of our ministry. And it was a morning study, and then we added an evening study. And so that was just one night a week. And it was something that I think was very, ministered a lot to the women who worked or had little ones that they couldn't put in childcare or whatnot. And so I think if you have things that are really benefiting the women and benefiting the church through the growth of the women and the maturity of the women, that you can find a place for them there.
That's great. That's good. Well, in the book, you lay out 5 steps in discipling women to use their gifts in the church. So modeling, training, opportunities, feedback, and then more opportunities. So tell us why you chose those 5 and how that works.
Yeah. I stole those from Jesus. That's kind of his model, right? If you've ever read Master Plan of Evangelism, that's kind of a summation of that historic book. But we see Jesus modeling for his disciples, right? And I think it's really important when we're trying to train women to learn a new skill or to have a ministry, we need to show them what it looks like. So if we, maybe a woman is going to MC an event, and I might say, well, you should see Mrs. Moeller, how she MCs an event. Watch her, learn from her. She has done this. She knows how to do it. You will do it differently. Your personality is different. I'm not asking you to be, a clone of Mary Moeller, but I do want you to watch and learn from her. Or if you're helping her learn how to teach or to do hospitality. So I think we need to model for people what our expectations are. But then we need the training piece. And I think sometimes this is missing in our churches, where we need to sit down with women and explain what our expectations are, explain kind of the details of what we're expecting them to do. If we want them to teach a Bible study, we don't just kind of throw them out there and say, okay, teach. Here's how to teach. Here are some of the principles. This is what we're looking for. But then I think the opportunities, if we train someone how to do something, we need to let them try it. Because you really learn as you get out there and do it, and then I think the piece that is way too often missing in our women's ministries and in our churches in general is the feedback piece. So you've modeled it for them, they've been trained, they've given it a shot, right? Whatever it is you've asked them to do, but then you need to give them feedback. You need to tell them all the things that were right and good about what they did, but you should point out at least one thing that would help it be better. I think we hesitate because we only want to be encouraging, right? But as I did a study on that, encouragement is really helping people be better, not just feel better. And I think people feel loved and cared for when we are helping them improve in whatever it is. So for instance, in our Bible study, what we would do is the same teacher would teach on a Monday night, And then they would come back and teach on Wednesday morning, the same thing. After the Monday teaching, while all the people were in their discussion groups, we would call this teacher aside and we'd go over her talk with her. And we'd point out lots of good, wonderful things, right, that she did, because there were many. But then she knew there was coming at least one thing that maybe would help improve. And at first we were nervous about doing this. How are people going to take it? It was the highlight of everybody's week because we could see that, yes, I want to be better at this. Nobody's perfect at anything, right? There's always improvement to be made, especially as you're learning. But when I would teach, it would be the same thing. I'd sit there and I'd say, okay, guys, how can I make this better next time? And I remember one specific time they'd say, well, one of the things they said was, oh, that was really good. You should really do that, And I said, I didn't even have that in my notes. That just kind of the Holy Spirit just brought. And they said, well, write it down, do it again. That was good. But then they would point out things, well, you use that term, but you didn't define it. And I think that might have confused people. Don't just talk about sanctification if they don't know what it is. So just give a, half-sentence explanation. So I think we really need to give people the feedback piece to help them get better. But then we need to give them another opportunity to try it again. I was a part of a church once that they would ask someone to do something, and then if they did a great job, they'd ask them again. If they didn't do a good job, they'd never ask them again. And they wouldn't always tell them why or point out to them what the issue was, and that's hurtful.
It's just easier. It's less safe face.
Yeah. Easier for that person, but hurtful for the person that was trying it. And it's hurtful to the body of Christ because maybe it's because that person should be serving in another area. Maybe it's because that person could be really, really good at it. They just need some help. I tease my husband all the time because he used to teach at our crew meetings in college, and he was a new believer and I was a newer believer. But he had great teaching, but he would spend the whole time with his back to the class writing on the board. And so obviously God had gifted him, but he needed to learn some skills, right? He needed somebody to say, turn around, look at us when you teach. And that's true of all of us. We always have room to grow. So we need to do the modeling, and we need to do the training, and we need to do the opportunities. We need to give feedback, and then we need to give more opportunities, and then more feedback. Like it's a loop. Yeah.
So I recognized him as being here, but I neglected to point out that Dr. Greg Allison is one of those members of our stellar faculty teaching Christian theology. So thank you, Dr. Allison.
He's the handsome guy in the back.
You do, yes. Yeah. Planning the birthday party planner back there in the back row.
That's right.
Okay, so you also talked about addressing teamwork in the book, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. I have some thoughts, but you compare ministry teams to real plants as opposed to like plastic or silk ones. So what's that about?
Well, I like home decorating shows, and, I like to look at Pinterest and all the things. And all the decorating gurus will tell you it's good to have plants in different rooms. They add life and whatever. But they always say they should be real plants and not silk or plastic plants. But I don't know if you've done any decorating. It's so tempting to get the fake ones because they look good, and they don't grow. Like, you can put them somewhere and they will stay right where you put it, the same size, in the same pot. They don't need any light. They don't need any water. You can just ignore them, right? The problem is when we're working with women is that they're living. They're alive. Those are the best kind of people to work with, right? The ones that are alive, and you want them to grow. But you need to treat them like you would treat individual plants, real plants. And so they need care. You need to put them in the right places. You need to treat them differently, one from another. One plant might need a lot of sun, and one plant might need not as much sun. You need sometimes to prune them because they get a little big for their britches or their pots, right? Other plants are kind of floundering, and you need to give them nourishment and help them grow. And so again, the focus, and I talk about this so much in the book, but you need to get to know your women. It's not about getting to know how to do a program as much as it is to know the women that you're dealing with and how God is working in their lives. And then you need to treat them as individual living plants. Be a student of your living plants and get to know what they need.
That's really excellent advice. Really good. So I learned from someone years ago when we were talking about this topic that she really advised ministry wives who are getting started. So you've moved into this new place, whether it's a parsonage anymore or not. And she really said, like, put a red X on the boxes for things you need right away. Okay. Put the rest of them in the garage and get the women over into your home. Like, don't waste a lot of time. Get them there, and like you're saying, like, get to know them.
Yes.
Give them a little survey to fill out that says, what do you see your giftedness as? What kind of things have you done in the church before that you would like to do again? And she said, give them something to take home, whether it's a little candle or a bookmark, but like from the start, before you're getting your house perfect, they know you've been there 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever, but you're getting to know them. And then you're looking at those surveys later and you're observing these women. Right. And if there's someone who's late to everything, like, you're kind of making a mental note that we're not putting her in charge of program or whatever. And you're looking for strengths in people, and then you're building from there. So I thought that was wise advice.
Excuse me, I saw my throat. I don't know if you know this, Mary, but SWI really helped me get established here in Louisville. And that story reminded me of it because we had just moved in, and you asked me to teach discipleship to the women at SWI. And we were going to use, yes. And the Spiritual Disciplines book is what we were going to use at the time. Spiritual Disciplines, yes. Yes. And so I said, well, I think that's a good thing for me to do. I'll get to know people, whatever. I want to do this. But I said, my book is still in a box. I can't find my Spiritual Disciplines book by Whitney. And you said, I can get you a book. If you will teach this class, I will get you a book.
I was very confident in you teaching it, and we had met before Dr. Allison accepted the position. Yes, I believe you and Jody Ware and I met, and you wanted to know what this SWI thing was. Right. You asked good questions, and so I knew once he accepted the position that we wanted to plug you in, and that was one of my wiser moves.
Yeah, we didn't waste any time.
So also it's interesting in some of these like more event-driven things, how how do you get good help in the first place? So I think it's helpful to have some things about that. I'll never forget the time that we had an SWI grad who was in a first position in Georgia somewhere. And so she was having an event, and she invited me and 2 other SWI faculty to go down there and do a retreat for her. And so we were all excited, and we get down there, and she's a real type A person. And so she picks us up at the airport, and you can tell she's really agitated. It's like, Katie, what is wrong? And so she had delegated, which is something you have to do even that's kind of thing that as a burnout can happen if you don't delegate. But she'd given this one person the job. There wasn't a restaurant in town large enough to really cater this, but there was like an Olive Garden maybe 45 minutes away. So this one woman she'd ordered it, just go pick it up. So it's getting close to the time. She's getting nervous. She calls the woman on the phone. The woman answers the phone, and Katie says, something. And the lady literally says, "Oh, is that today?"
Oh, gosh.
She's not panicked. She just says, "Oh, is that today?" And Katie gets off the phone with her, calls Olive Garden. She gets some bus boy that wanted to make some extra money who would put the stuff in his car, meet her halfway. And you know what? The food was all there and everything. Nobody would know anything about this. It worked. But lesson learned. I mean, but the tendency would be to never ask that woman to do anything again, that she should come groveling to you. But what you have to do is then, put her with someone more experienced. Don't give her that much responsibility.
Right.
But I think burnout is an issue for some in women's ministry. And I think, it's been said you can't help others if you're drowning yourself.
Right.
So therefore you as the leader have got to make sure, as hard as it is for many perfectionists to delegate, you have to let some stuff go, and they may not do it exactly how you would do it. But you delegate.
Yes. Sometimes you hope they'll do it even better.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the goal.
And then I know others who have a fear of asking women to do something so much because they don't want it to be embarrassing. They don't want them to feel obligated, and they'd sooner just do it themselves than have to go to someone and ask.
Yeah.
So we got to work through that.
Right.
But there are other people who will ask in the wrong way, and so we would never say this, but you could go up to someone and say, Nora, the Lord has told me, like, you are the one to be the teacher for this. Now, are you going to look me in the face and say, well, you're wrong?
Right,
I mean,
right.
You can't do that.
Right, right.
You know, and you don't want them to feel compelled to say yes because of obligation, but because I'm so excited about this event,
Right.
and I would really like you to be a part of it, and we would like you to consider
Yes.
this role in it. Will you pray about it? But you give them a face-saving way to say
Yes.
no. You don't ask for a
Right.
decision on the
Right,
spot.
right, right.
And so I think that can be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things we could talk about in terms of getting good help. I think that there's also the danger of people who are gifted in areas like maybe you've got a floral designer in your church or a photographer or
Right,
someone who does
right.
calligraphy. And so I would hope they want to use their giftedness in the
Yes,
local church.
yes.
But you can't assume that you can just call on them and they're going to do
Exactly.
that for free every time. So
Exactly.
how can we work on that?
Well, yeah, I think you need to talk to the various women and know their gifting too and how God is calling them to serve the church. Because, there was a woman in our church that expressed an interest in teaching Bible study. I thought, great, and I got to know her a little bit, and I learned that she was a pediatric cardiologist. And I thought, whoa, she's not going to want to teach at our church. She's got her hands full. And God had called her to teach, and she was an excellent teacher.
That's awesome.
And so it's like I made an assumption about her and about her lifestyle and about whatever. And we can't do that. We need to find out how God has gifted people to serve the church and then, approach them that way. And I think, too, that was really good when you talk about how do you ask people to do things, because I made the mistake over and over again, I think early on, or first of all, I would just put it on Facebook. We need somebody to do this, And it would end up being that I was looking for a slot filler rather than a woman maybe who was gifted or called by God to do something. And so what God taught me through that is instead of just putting a need out there, decide what I'm looking for in the person to fill that need. So maybe it is a child care worker. I'm not just looking for somebody to sit in there. Now, sometimes you do. Sometimes you get desperate. You just need somebody to sit in there. But what you're really looking for is someone who loves children, who wants to share the gospel with children, who has a heart for that ministry. And then I pray about who do I see that looks like that in our congregation? Who do I get to know that just comes to mind when I think about that? Then I call her up and say, I have seen in you this, this, and this. God brought you to mind as maybe somebody who might enjoy heading up our kids program. Is that something you feel God's calling you to? It's a whole different ballgame. So I think it's really important to look at the characteristics and the gifting and the qualities that we're looking for in someone, and then approach them that way and say, boy, you look like you would be a good fit for this.
And you do that personally, and that's
Yes.
very sincerely stated. And
Yes.
again, you're giving them a graceful way to say,
Exactly.
I'll pray about it and I'll let you know.
Exactly.
There are people who are not going to answer a Facebook thing for reasons that
Exactly.
you've stated, or
Somebody
they're
else
just-
will do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or they're
yeah.
just thinking like, well, you would never want me to do that. I'm not gifted
Exactly.
enough to do that. But if you personally ask them, it will
Totally.
make a difference. There are other people who are just such like golden retriever types, tail always wagging, that they're like,
Yes.
you ask them to do anything, yeah, I'll do it. And they're
Yes.
signing up, which may be an issue of overcommitment, what we could talk
Right.
about later. But there are other women who are much more careful thinkers, and they want to know exactly what's involved. So
Yep.
they're going to ask you
Yep.
good questions like, all right,
Yep.
you think of me for this? Tell me why that is.
Yeah.
What is involved? How many
Yep.
weeks will this be? And then they will think about it, and they may
Yes.
say yes, and then they may be some of the best people you have.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you
I have
what-
a whole section on that in there of
Yes.
just that you need to explain the expectations, the hours that you're expecting them to work. What would it look like if they take on this job? I think it's important.
It is very
and then
important.
give them an ending date too. Like, I'm going to ask you to
forever.
do this, but you don't have to do it when you're,
Right.
93. Let's just do it for a year and see, and then we can reevaluate for you and for us and for everybody.
That's right. I've had this happen very few times, but it's memorable when it does, where I had someone say that we had presented that way, like we would really like you
Yeah.
to do this. And she didn't say it to my face, but she said it to someone on the team. And she said, okay, I'll do it, but only if you can't find anyone else to do it. To which I sent the word back, no, thank you.
Yeah,
We don't need that kind of attitude. So
Right,
if
right.
we can't find anyone else to do it, isn't that what we're looking for here?
Yeah.
And you discuss this in the book too, but it can be such a great discipleship relationship
Yes.
that's different than going through Titus with some young woman, to
Exactly.
have her come alongside you and to see how
Yes.
you do this.
Totally.
And to see how you handle it when people don't show up with the food, or how just how the details come together.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
so it can be really, really helpful.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, you also, getting back to the book more specifically, you talk about what really convinced you to step into leadership
Yeah.
in women's ministry, and how the Lord has taught you through that.
Yeah.
So talk us
Yeah.
through that a bit.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting experience for me. So my husband and I had been on crew staff, and then he was at seminary, and then he was teaching at a seminary out in Portland, Oregon. And we had attended a church for about maybe 2.5 years, something like that. And the pastor approached me then and said, we just have a few volunteers that are doing some events for women, but I would really like someone to consider coming on part-time staff and really like ministering to our women and helping women grow. And he said, nothing definite, but I'd like to talk to you about it and see if this might be a fit. And so at first when I heard this, I was super excited, right? Oh yeah, this would be great. And then the more I thought about it, this was an historic church. There were women there who had walked with God a lot longer than I had walked with God. There were a lot of very wise women, and women that I said before who had much more experience working with women in the local church than I did. I just attended at that point and wasn't really involved in a lot of women's things because there weren't a lot of women's things. So when I met with my pastor, I expressed these things to him. I said, there's women who are, wiser than me. They've walked with God longer, they have more experience. And I know what I kind of expected him to say, maybe hoped he would say. I thought he would say, oh no, like, I've seen your walk with God, or, people have said like, you're wise and, you have exactly the experience that, we were hoping for. But he didn't say any of those things. He said, well, maybe that's true.
I agree with you.
Exactly. He said that may be true. He said, but if God is calling you to lead in this way, you need to lead. You should pray about it. And that was really impactful to me. And I definitely did go home and pray about it. And one of the places that God took me to was Psalm 78. And I don't know how I ended up there, but the end of Psalm 7, in fact, I brought it so that I could read it and not massacre my memorization of it. It's where God is talking about, or the psalmist, I think it's Asaph, is talking about God choosing David to be king. And this is what it says. It says, God chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheep pens. He brought him from tending nursing ewes to be shepherd over his people Jacob, over Israel, his inheritance. He shepherded them with a pure heart and guided them with his skillful hands. And I think what I learned from this was that God is in the habit of choosing people from unexpected places. There were all kinds of other sons of Jesse that he could have chosen. But he said, isn't there somebody else out in the field somewhere that, that might be the right person? And then, also, I think what struck me from this, I had been taking care of my kids at home. I was shepherding my little lambs, right? And I was homeschooling a couple of them. And I see that the experiences that God had given David as a shepherd were exactly what he wanted to use for God to shepherd his people. And then I guess, lastly, just the part that he shepherded them with a pure heart and guided them with his skillful hands. And I thought I needed to grow a lot in the pure heart part and definitely in the skills, but I knew what God wanted. He wanted me to follow him closely, have a pure heart in my ministry, and learn the skills necessary in order to lead well. And I think that passage and the lessons I learned at the time have been impactful throughout my ministry. When I'm asked to do something that I feel not capable of doing, or, I'm not suited for it, I think, well, God knows, right? He's the one that has somehow, through my experiences, equipped me to do this. He's the one on whom I need to depend to be able to do this. And my job is to follow him with a pure heart and try to learn the skills necessary for me to carry this out. And this has helped me too, I think, just in working with women, because it's easy in a church or even in your neighborhood, if you're looking for somebody to lead a Bible study with or whatever, to kind of, your attention is drawn to the glitzy stars, the people who are capable out there, the ones who kind of shine, the ones who, are good speakers, all the things. And they may be exactly the ones that God is choosing. But there also may be somebody out in the field somewhere that is not the person that stands out automatically, and we need to have in our mind and in our purview that God is choosing people maybe from unexpected places. He's preparing them in ways that maybe we wouldn't expect, but those might be exactly the people that God wants to use in our ministries.
So humble hearts versus glitzy stars,
Exactly.
I think is what you said at Women's
Exactly.
Auxiliary, and that's very, very good.
Yeah.
Well, this is awesome. Tell me, it says a short guide to women's ministry, and then it's, is there a series of short guides?
There's a series. I think there's maybe 8 now.
Really?
Some of them are more for like leadership in the church. So there's a short guide to groups. There's a short guide to maybe studying the Bible, a short guide to spiritual disciplines, a short guide to youth ministry, I think. But then there's there's a short guide to Islam.
Oh, wow.
So there were 2 or 3 when I wrote this, and now they're
So yours
adding
was in the
to
early
it.
part, and so they're all
Yes.
coming out together, it sounds like. Or close.
Kind of one sort of right after the other. I don't know if they have other
Yeah, and I'm
ones
sure
planned.
Colby
but-
could tell us if we have some of the other ones in stock as well.
Yeah,
But that's
yeah.
good to know.
Yeah.
Well, this has been delightful and
Thank you,
motivating
Mary.
to get the book.